Well, let's start off this lesson by taking a picture of what we've got so far. Pretty good, but it could be a lot better. First off, we see this is really dark over here, and all the lighting looks really unnatural. There's no shadows, for instance. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make a clone of this picture right here. In other words, a copy, just by going over to the Clone Rendered Frame window and clicking here. That way we get a clone. We want to have this for a reference for later. Okay, you guys can just put yours over on the other screen. For me, since I only have one screen, I'm going to minimize it. The other thing is normally it's a good idea to work in the 480 resolution, but for now I think we'll keep it in the higher resolution just so that it's easier to see things. Before I begin, I'm going to go ahead and draw a marquee around my table and chairs and freeze them. Right-click, Object Properties, turn off the Show Frozen in Gray, and freeze. Now, creating lighting is one of the most fun things I think there is to do in 3ds Max, and you'll see why in a little bit, especially when you see the results. I think for today, we should just go ahead and try and make this lighting as natural as possible. Over in the Command panel, you've got the Geometry tab. Next to it, you've got your shapes. Then next to that, you have lights. Go ahead and click on lights. You'll see the photometric lights are the ones that come up first. We don't want photometric lights. They're good, but they're hard to work with. We'll go down to standard. They're also good and really easy to work with. I'm going to click on an OmniLight. OmniLights are the lights that we're going to use the most. And just place it down here on the floor. I'm going to right click so that I don't keep making OmniLights, and then go over to my Select and Move tool. Down in my coordinates, I'm going to zero this out. So one thing I could do is right click, and that makes it 0 right there. Or you could just type in a 0. Either way will work. For the up and down, how high it is, I'll put it at 11.8 feet. So that should be just below the level of the ceiling. Let's take a look at this again. Now, let's do a new render and see what it looks like. Well, it looks much better, but I think we can still get better than this. With the OmniLight still selected, I'm going to go over here to the Command panel and go to the Modify tab. Here we'll see it's the OmniLight. Before I do anything else, I'm going to change the name of the OmniLight. I'm going to leave the Omni part, but I'm going to include Ceiling. Now we have OmniLight Ceiling. I keep the OmniLight part because that way in the Scene Explorer everything lines up, because you're going to get a bunch of lights. Very important to name them. Okay, down here we have all the parameters. Going down the list, one of the most important things would be to click the shadows. Now let's take a look. We do indeed have shadows now, but they're a little bit too strong. And the lighting's still very unnatural. Let's keep progressing down the list of parameters. The first one we see is intensity, color, and attenuation. Let's open that up. Here we see that the multiplier, that's the level of the light, how bright it is. So if I was to bring that up, do a render, you'll see it's now much brighter. On the other hand, if I was to bring it down, you would see it's much dimmer. It looked pretty good at 1, so that's where I'll leave it. The other thing is the color of the light. Clicking in here, it starts off with just pure white. That's not really very natural. Most of the light bulbs in your house you'll find are soft white, And there's that for a reason, because it gets kind of harsh to have the lighting be 100% white light. Here I've brought it down to 230 and 250 respectively on the green and the blue sliders, and it's giving me a nice soft white look. Similar, but not the same to the pure light. Let's see that now. Much nicer, just a slightly bit warmer. Okay, we still have those harsh shadows, and the lighting still looks very unnatural as it's the same everywhere, and lights just don't work that way. Lights decay. In other words, the further away you get from a light, the dimmer it is. In the decay, right below the multiplier, we can change that from none to inverse. Now let's see what happens. It seems a bit dimmer, but also a bit more natural. Since it's a little bit dimmer, I think I will bring up the multiplier. How about 1.2? Let's see what that does. Even a little bit more. It's a little bit moody. How about 1.5? Oh, that's nice. You can see it's a little bit lighter around the edges, but a little bit darker in the corners. Much more like a natural light. A little bit lighter at the top and dimmer towards the bottom. Okay. Now let's see if we can't do something about those shadows. The next rollout to really concern ourselves with is the shadow parameters. Just like the light itself had a multiplier, so do the shadows. It starts off as pure black, and that's okay. We'll leave it at that for now. The density is 1. We'll bring that down to, let's say, 0.7. And we're going to change this to light affects the shadow color. That'll just change it ever so slightly. Since we are at the white light, which is almost like white, it won't change it that much. Well, that's starting to look better already. But those shadows are just a bit crisp. Let's see if we can't do something to soften those just a little bit. Down here in the shadow map parameters, we'll see this bias and size sample range. If we just bring the size from 512, where it's at by default, down to about 200, let's see what happens there. That made it a bit softer. Very nice. Okay, we have a pretty natural light, except for the fact that wherever the light is not hitting is absolutely black, and that's not natural at all. What we're going to have to do to correct this is actually add some more lights in here. We'll refer to those as ambient lights. Okay, we're going to create our ambient lighting by just putting in another Omni light. Actually, put one in each one of these corners. I'm going to go right click, and then I'm going to go T for top. That way I can see things a little bit better. Moving that over there, I'm going to shift copy, creating another light. This time, instead of making a copy, I'm going to make an instance. And I'm going to call this Omni Ambient, AMB for Ambient 2. And say OK. Here is our Omni 1. That was the first ambient we put in. I'll go ahead and change that name right now as well. There we go. Now I'll select both of these Shift copy them down, and make another instance. Go back to camera mode, and let's see what they look like. Well, that certainly is bright. The problem is that there's too many lights at too high of an intensity. Let's go back to our ambient light. If we look at the parameters, we'll see that the light is on, the shadows are off. That's good. We don't actually want it to cast shadows. The multiplier for the light is at 1.5. Let's bring that way down to, let's say, 0.2. Everything else we can just leave the same. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, by the way, the reason why we made it an instance instead of a copy is because if we go to any of these other ambient lights, we'll see that they have changed as well. Oh, that's not bad. Look at that. Now we've got, these are a little bit softer, nice soft shadow, nice light. That looks pretty natural. Let's look at it in comparison to our first example with no lighting. There really is no comparison. By the way, remember when we put the bump map on the floor? In other words, connected the picture to the bump slot in the material? Look at how nice and three-dimensional that floor looks. Finally, save a copy of your well-lit picture in Project 2C. So, your last name, your period number, and project to C. JPEG, and that's it.